Welcome back. Basically, you just saw in the last group meeting, in your small groups, a video. That video talked about how a community development training program works. And in that video, you saw that there were 3 groups of people in the program. The first group was the training team. The second group was the local committee. The third group was the community development volunteers, the actual workers. Now, we're going to spend time in this hour concentrating on the trainer. In subsequent hours, we're going to talk about what is the job of the committee and what is the job of the trainer. Now, I'm going to tell you a story, and this talks about a whole program, community development training, and it talks about a little bit about all 3 people's roles, the training team, the committee, and the community development volunteer. But what I want you to listen for is what is the role or the job of the trainer. Okay? Okay, let me tell you the story. There once were several outsiders that we call trainers who came to a village. And when they came to this village, they saw children who were poorly nourished. And they saw kids that weren't very well clothed. And as they talked to people, as the trainers talked to people in the village, they began to hear about kids dying. They were dying from measles, and they were dying from diarrhea. And as the trainers began to talk more and more to the people in the village, they began to hear about witchcraft, curses being put on people, and all kinds of bad things, spiritual things. Now, these trainers really wanted to help. They were from the outside, and they wanted to help, but they knew if they were going to help, they really didn't want to bring stuff in. What they wanted to do was train the people how to help themselves. So they began to talk to the village about how the village could be changed through the people's own self-work, their own self-effort. And so as they began to talk about this, the training team, as they talked to the community said, well, what's the first thing we got to do? And the training team that said, well, the first thing we need to do is form a local leadership committee. Okay. So after we form a local leadership committee, then what happens? Well, then we will train the committee what their job is. Okay. Then what happens? Then the committee will choose people to be trained as community development volunteers. Well, who's going to do this training of the committee and the volunteers? Oh, we will. We can help you in the training cycle as trainers. We can help you do that training. Okay, once we do the training, then what's going to happen? Well, the next thing that's going to happen is that as the community development volunteers go through the training, they're going to begin to apply what they're learning. But more importantly, they're going to be sharing what they're learning with their neighbors. But we'll talk more about the role of the committee and the volunteers in future sessions. What I want you to do in your small group is 2 or 3 things. One of the things I want you to do from this story, I want you to come up with a list of things that a trainer does. Now, to help you a little bit more, we've got a short video clip. It's less than a minute that talks about trainers. In fact, you saw it in the big video, the 15-minute, 12-minute video that you saw. And then, so I want you to come up with a list of things that a training team does. Now, after you've done that, we'll come back and I want to share with you the idea of who makes up a training team and how big the training team should be. But I want you to go into your small groups and talk about what's the job of the training team after you've seen the video.
The first group that helps lead community development training is the training team. Before your peace trip, you will form a CDT training team from members of your small group. The training team's main function is to effectively deliver the principles and programs of CDT to the local community. On your peace trip, your small group training team will usually partner with a local church, but may occasionally work with some other community organization. During this first contact, the training team will hear from the local group about their community's needs. Your team will then work with the community to create a development strategy based on those needs. Your training team will also work with community leaders to start a seed project and find the volunteers who will participate and lead the development programs after your team has gone home. Your training team's ultimate goals are to help communities organize themselves, identify their own needs, develop strategies and solutions that rely on God's provision and their own work, and start to see the needs of other communities and share what they've learned. Your team will provide the training and encouragement to help these communities help themselves become healthy, and then go out and begin to help others.
Well, you just talked about the roles of the training team. Now, one thing I want to remind you, the people that are in the small groups, you are going to be training the people overseas in the church to be trainers. In other words, just what you've talked about. So this is the job that you're going to be teaching the trainers that they're going to do. But one of the things that we also need to talk about is what kind of people would make good trainers overseas. Some generic things. Normally, a training team is made up of 3 or 4 people. 3 or 4 people, men and women, and they are a mixture of people with different vocational backgrounds. So you don't want 4 medical people on your training team because, what happens if you have 4 medical people? They see all sick bodies. Or if you got 4 agriculturalists on your team, they want everybody to grow food. Well, that's good, but remember, you're trying to help them totally. So you want 3 or 4 people on the team, and you want them to have mixed backgrounds. But they don't have to have PhDs, they don't have to have university degrees, they just need to have practical skills in this area so they can teach. Now remember, you've got all these lesson plans that they'll be using, so they don't have to be highly, highly skilled people. The main thing is to know how to teach, to know how to help the community be involved. So these are a couple of key things as it relates to the people. 3 or 4 people, mixed in their backgrounds, men and women, though if you're going to be working in a Muslim community, you might have to have men working with men or women working with women. But in most open communities, you'd use a mixed training team. And the trainers are going to be training on all the different topics. So therefore, the guy that's got the agricultural background might teach on spiritual topics. And the person that's the pastor or the evangelist that's on that team will be teaching some medical topics. Now, we realize when you begin to talk about mother and child topics, who's the best one to talk about mother and child? Well, it's not the man, it's going to be the woman. So basically, when you're talking about a training team, these are some things that you want to keep in mind in the choosing of that training team overseas.